1989 as an undergraduate and was taught radio at WFUV. And then I went on to 30 years in public radio in Washington, Salisbury, Maryland, and then here in New York City at WNYC, which you saw in the white flags in the movie.
Well, this movie predates your time in journalism, right?
It does.
The time it's expressed here, not the movie.
It does, but the major word I wrote down throughout the film was like reverberation. Everything about this movie reverberated into me covering New York City in the 90s, in the 2000s, in the past few years. Even right now, with the federal government shutdown, like everything about this movie resonated with me and what we're going through today.
Are we okay over here?
Okay, it's just taking a second.
Okay, good. Next, I'd like to invite up the people who are responsible for the last hour and 40 minutes that you just saw, the co-creators of Drop Dead City, Michael Rohatyn and Peter Yost. Can you come on up? Have a seat, turn your mics on. We're very fortunate to have them here. Let me ask you, Michael, first off, this is the first time I've had the chance to say, is it Rohatyn or Rohatyn?
Well,
Turn like that. Thank you, very good.
Well, my father would say Rohatyn, and I say Rohatyn. It's one of those stories. It's a great story.
You say tomato,
I say Rohatyn, he said Rohatyn. So, in this context, we should say Rohatyn.
And first of all, Peter, you're a professional filmmaker. You're largely responsible for what we saw here, but Michael is the story guy. How did you guys get this whole thing started?
Yeah, well, Michael is actually a great filmmaker as well, and if you want to blame somebody, probably blame him even more than me.
Okay.
Not just some, but no, it's a complete collaboration from start to finish.
How do you know each other?
We know each other just kind of socially through our kids, actually, originally, and we've been friends for a long, long time. And it came out, we were talking about our various childhoods. I grew up in Buffalo. Michael did not. He grew up in the city. And he just started telling some stories that struck me as amazing. And then he had conversations with his partner at home. And it just kind of came out organically that this story somehow had never been told. It's kind of been skipped over because the 70s, a lot has been done, written about it, a lot of films, a lot of cultural pieces, but they sort of are downstream from the fiscal crisis, essentially. There was even Rick Burns' kind of 10 or 12-hour-long series of the history of New York, and I think they did all of 15 seconds on this. It's just like, and the economy went to hell, and then there was a blackout, and then there was Son of Sam, and there's all this cultural curve. Nobody really, for better or worse,
And nobody wants to do a story about numbers anyway, right?
correct.
Yeah.
And we won't again.
Yeah, okay. So two of the fellows who really understood the numbers in real time, if you will, are with us as well. And I'm very proud again to introduce them. George Arzt and Mike Eisgrau. George was the city editor of the New York Post beginning in 1968, as we said earlier. And Mike Eisgrau, whom I've known forever, covered the funeral of Robert Kennedy Jr., the funeral of Martin Luther King, and you covered this crisis.
Well, I covered this crisis, Steve, but I want to talk, if you give me a minute or so.
That's why you're here.
Tell you a little bit how the people.
Put the mic in front of you.
Yeah.
Mic on. It's not on.
Okay.
Turn it
I
on.
want to tell you a little bit and put it in perspective. It's not working.
Just turn it on. He's had no experience with microphones.
I know from this mic stuff. Okay. Good. I want to tell you a little bit of background about radio news. And Rich Lamb knows this as well as I do. Back in those days, and I want to go back before 1975, I came back to the late great operate WNAW Radio News in 1967. I had been anchoring television news out in the Midwest. And radio and radio news in the 1960s and 70s was a much bigger deal. If you looked at some of the news conferences in the documentary, you saw an awful lot of microphones put up there. I even think I saw my hand in one of those. WNAW Radio News, for an independent station, when I got there in 1967, had a 28-person news department. You can barely have some guy on the radio, and a lot of kids don't know what radio is, but barely have some guy on the radio doing headlines in the morning. We had a news director, assistant news director, we had editors, we had assignment people, we had reporters like myself. And now, WCBS, as Rich can tell you, we had the two all-news stations that have been around for many years. WINS started in 1965, CBS started shortly afterwards, and CBS is gone. Terrible thing, and as Rich can tell you, it was a very great loss for the city. But radio reporters are different than print reporters, and they work, and they have been. Any one shift that I was on, I could bounce from a triple homicide to a city hall news conference to a parade. So we really could not take the time to go in depth. As you know, when I would do a 1-minute piece for a 5-minute newscast, I'd get yelled at because it was too long. And because of that, I can give you some vignettes of what happened from 67 through 75 and beyond.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you here for a second, because before you get to those vignettes, I want to hear from the guy just to your right, George Arzt, because George, you were in the driver's seat just as Mike was in 1975 when all this went down. And I'd just be curious, you have the two filmmakers sitting to your right. From your memory, how accurate was this portrayal of what went down? It was certainly compact, because, you know, it seemed to drag on forever. I remember as a kid. But this is the first time I've ever seen it in such absorbable form.
I thought it did very well in giving you the feeling of what it was like on city streets, and the chaos in government of what was going on. Having said that, I would say that poor AB gets blamed for all this stuff, when actually this stuff was going on from years before AB. You know, certainly we all knew when John Lindsay was mayor, and way before John Lindsay. But we knew that there were games going on, and the feeling in Room 9, City Hall Press Corps, was that the last mayor of New York is going to be left holding the bag and be blamed for everything that's going on. In fact, it was AB. And we long after the fiscal crisis was over, to this day, there are things that are going on. And we'd like to say that, okay, this has always happened, and things will be this way. But in fact, if people honestly knew what was going on, they wouldn't vote in the people that they have.
Are you talking today, George?
Yes. That is true. And previous administrations. people don't take a look at these people during the elections, when campaigns are going on, and you say, I'm gonna add 5,000 more cops. I'm going to put a freeze on affordable housing. Exactly what's the price of this? And who's gonna pay for it? And no one is asking these questions in Room 9 because of the fiscal crisis.
Those of you who don't know, Room 9 is the press room in
Yes.
City Hall.
We always used to ask, how much is this going to cost? And, people go, but that's sort of fallen out of favor. And so more and more people are electing these people who don't know what's going on. It's going to take them a long time to find out. And by the time it's found out, the city's going to be in a mess again.
Can I give you a vignette about, quick one, because George knows so much more about the intricacies of this than me. But I want to give you an A-beam vignette. You saw at the beginning of this documentary, A-beam being sworn in January 1st, New Year's Day, big crowd at City Hall. Well, technically, the city has to have a mayor from 12 hours before. And the time that mayor is sworn in, the official time, I got the assignment to be the pool reporter at Abe and Mary Beam's home out in the Rockaways. So that's the way I spent my New Year's Eve. The good part of that was, boy, did that put out a nice Jewish spread. It was absolutely terrific, okay? And then he got sworn in, and as George is saying, Beam, fairly or unfairly, got the blame. When he left office, from what I understand, he had a $200 million surplus. But that's not the only thing. I was covering a story up in Harlem after the mayor left office. And I'm coming down, driving a WIW news unit down Lexington Avenue. And I get to Lexington and 79th Street. And it's rush hour. And there's a small man standing on the corner trying to wave down a cab. And nobody would stop for him. And then I realized, and I pulled the news unit over, and I said, "Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Let me take you to your office in Rockefeller Center." How soon people forget.
I got on the bus and Beam was standing there asking Mr. Mayor, what are you doing on the bus? And he said, riding to my job. And I said, that's great, Mr. Mayor. Don't you want to sit anywhere? He said, no one would get up. Beam was elected with the slogan, Beam knows the buck.
The phrase "too big to fail." I'm curious, from Michael and Peter, what was your reaction when you heard the people in the movie say "too big to fail"? I mean, the people who are younger here might automatically think first of 2008. Maybe most of us would think first of 2008. What was your reaction?
I mean, we hesitated to use it because it seemed sort of, we really wanted to stay in the period, and that is has a certain sort of, as a figure of speech, it's kind of overdetermined. But it brought us to the central truth, this repeating truth of the fact that banks continue to analyze risk and bring us to the same precipice over and over again. So it had the right, ring to it, not like this mic, but I guess that, yeah, we didn't, it still rings wrong to me because it's so much 2008, but it was the right thing,
I wonder whether that's where they got the phrase.
No, he was quoting, that was Gene Cameron in our interview.
In our era.
Yeah, that's where you got it. That was an interview of ours using that phrase. It wasn't in any of the coverage, so it was an anachronism.
I want to go to the audience, and we have a Fordham student over here. Farley, thank you very much for volunteering to go around. And I do see some young people in the audience, people who were nowhere near alive in 1975, maybe whose parents weren't even alive in 1975. I would be curious, first of all, if anybody has any questions, she's got a roving mic, and we would love to come around and ask you those questions, but I'd be particularly interested in hearing from some young people. But first, how about, okay, Julie Walker, you can pull us some rank. Julie Walker's a former reporter for 1010 Wins, now with AP Radio, and a member of the Deadline Club. In fact, she's our awards chair. And if you want to be, if you're an experienced journalist and want to be a judge, please see Julie after the program, okay?
Thanks for that plug. Great film. I'm wondering about your interviews and how much tape you have, how many people you interviewed versus the stock footage that you used. I mean, some of the people are no longer with us, so it's just how far back did your interviews go? How many were there? And just some general things about that part of the film.
Well, thank you. I've lost count of the exact number of interviews, but it's in there are numerous dozens, yeah, probably 3 dozen or so on camera, and numerous other people off camera, kind of situate the story. As you mentioned, I'd say sadly the vast majority of folks that we did interview have passed on. Not everybody, but easily the majority, a significant majority.
How long ago did you start filming?
Yeah, and to that end, we started this an embarrassingly long time ago. It was almost a decade at this point. I mean, it was 9 years probably, and we've both been doing a number of other things in the interim, but we actually led with the interviews because there was a wonderful person. You guys obviously, John Zuccotti.
I love John.
Exactly. Who was the first person literally that we went to when we were starting this process, and we had an amazing sit-down coffee with him for hours. And he was the deputy mayor of the Bean at the time, and he was just a fount of information and charisma and all kinds of stuff. And sadly, we made an appointment to come back a week or two later to interview him, and in that interim, he passed away. So that kind of just put a spur to us, and we just said, let's go and grab everybody that we can, even if we don't yet fully have a plan. So we really led with getting everybody when we could, and then took everything around.
Yeah, and we pretty much put everybody that we interviewed, except there were 3, I think, that didn't make the cut, but as you saw how many people we have in it, kind of put everybody in there.
Yeah, because we kind of gradually, if there isn't really a clear hero or villain in the Hollywood sense, and we thought that complexity was true and mirrored the complexity of the story. That we personally we could have this as a longer discussion now, but it's interesting to hear that you thought we were harsh on Bean, which we might well have been. To our mind, I personally think we both had a lot of affection and admiration for him. Thought that he was an honest guy from what we could tell, and in the scheme of politicians, that's a lot. But that he was from a particular era and had been comptroller, and he wasn't going to switch, and neither were many others. And so, we could debate that, and again, you would know.
Until it's said.
Exactly, right. But there was complexity in it, so it's not just like, oh, Bean was a hero nor a villain. And as a result, we kind of made a composite of as many people as we could get to tell the story.
I'm going to ask Farley to come over here, because I see a few young people in the audience, and I know it's midterm week at Fordham. And the 4 ladies sitting right over here in the 3rd row, I would just love to hear, just pass the mic down, 10 seconds or 20 seconds from each of you about your reactions, because I'm fairly sure that none of you were around in 1975. Just check. Okay, go ahead.
You were that so much of the city seemed very, very familiar. Like the streets seemed very familiar. And it does seem like the same crises are happening, so I was struck by the repetitiveness of the fiscal crises.
I grew up in New York in the late 90s, early 2000s, and my father grew up in New York in the time that this movie was taking place.
Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Sure, I am 26.
Okay.
And so I loved seeing the images and hearing the sounds of the city that my father grew up in, which I've only heard in his stories. And to me that was really, really cool. And I think the thing that has struck me most in watching this and also in hearing the conversation here and hearing the conversation in other places is the way that New York was sort of described in this period and before as like a truly working class city, and that something was lost when during this fiscal crisis and perhaps more attention was paid to thanks and less to the unions. And to me it's really interesting to see how some of those same tensions are playing out today, especially in the current mayoral race.
Who would have thought that a documentary about New York City's fiscal crisis would be so funny? And I really liked how I could feel the kind of New York City characters, these union guys and their personalities was very entertaining to me. Toward the middle of the movie, I was tearing up. But you know, it was very effective. I will. And something I found very moving was the idea of the vision of the utopian city, and what happens to that vision. It's very moving.
She did tell one friend, I can't hear me, but she did. So thank you for that. But I was especially struck by the existence of a New York City middle class that doesn't really exist anymore. As someone who grew up here my entire life, I think the most moving part of the film was the blonde woman who was the wife of the police officer who was being interviewed after he had just gotten laid off. He had dedicated, I think, 6 or 7 years to the force and then had suddenly, without warning, really gotten laid off. And she was talking about how, the unemployment benefit at the time was $95, and that won't help us. And then it had a shot of their house, and it was a nice place. I don't know what borough it was in, but they were clearly a one-income family. She was talking about how, I don't know where he's gonna get a new job, and she was surrounded by the children, and it was very clear that she wasn't looking for a job for herself. But just the fact that that sort of family could exist in New York City, and I'm sure that those families do exist in New York City, but they're much rarer. And just seeing, they're homeowners, presumably, they're a single income household, at least 2 kids, and they're this sort of, this thing that it doesn't really exist anymore for us growing up now. The idea of home ownership is this sort of pipe dream that none of us are going to experience unless we somehow come into a boatload of money. But the idea that her husband could have such a working class job, being a cop, he maybe didn't need higher education or anything like that. But seeing that be possible and then suddenly ripped away is very interesting, because we are growing up already having that ripped away from us, and seeing that existing and seeing that happen sort of in real time was moving, but also sort of made me angry that we never probably will get to experience that.
Quick answer from each of you, and you can answer as you pass the mic back down, very quick. Had you ever heard of the 1975 fiscal crisis before you saw this movie?
Yes, I took a class in high school on the history of New York City in the 1980s, so it started with lessons about the 75 fiscal crisis.
Okay, next.
Yes, I've heard of it too. I went to Hunter College, and there were all these activists talking about free CUNY, and I realized that I learned about how CUNY used to be great, and then what happened.
Yes, but only in the context of other things, like the public school calendar.
Yes, but only a name. I didn't know anything about it. So
Okay.
it's nice to hear that I'm here.
Great. Thank you, ladies, appreciate it. Just any of you. Jay Golden seemed kind of central to me as I was watching this in I don't know, pulling the trigger. He was the first guy to basically said the emperor has no clothes. Am I wrong about that? And the second part is, if he had not done that, would someone eventually have had to?
Yes, it was already, investigations into city finances were already going on. Jay had a chance to say that all these papers were missing. They were thrown into the closet and unaccounted for. In fact, when they both were taken against the city books, it was found there was not much difference in the thing. But Jay and Bean hated each other, and there was this huge age difference, but Jay obviously was interested in running for mayor, and Bean was very much against that. So
it came from two different wings of the Democratic Party. This is something I've forgotten over the years. I think I said, wasn't he Bean's protege? Yeah. No.
Not at all.
One was from Brooklyn, Bean was from Brooklyn. Brooklyn clubhouse politician. And then you had the Golden from the Bronx, right? And he was a reformist.
But also, Bean was a clubhouse politician. Jay was a reformer. You know, and so they come from two different wings of the Democratic Party.
Any more questions? Okay.
I just want to say one thing to you press people. There was a laugh in this screening that has never occurred before, and it was very gratifying to me. It was when our hero reporter, Gregory Jackson, who flubs, and incidentally, this is great. This was a great sort of a cracking of the problem for us when we realized the perfect opening of the film was him screwing up his lines, because it conveys how hard it is to tell the story. So we got that out of the way. But later in the film, when he blows it, he's in the sheep's meadow, and he blows it and he tries again, and there's a big cloud of dust. That's never gotten a laugh, and I love it. That was, you know, he really worked the timing on that to be respect, and it has never worked.
That was Doug
Thank you
Johnson
for getting it.
Was that Doug Johnson from Eyewitness?
Gregory Jackson.
Gregory Jackson.
Gregory Jackson.
Okay. We have some other hands up. One right here, and then we'll go to that.
Well,
Proud of yourselves. Congratulations.
I just
Okay, one at a time.
want to give you one more vignette. That I have never met. Your dad was terrific in how he negotiated and worked his way through the mess. And I would dip in and out of the story. But I worked early mornings. And in radio, you did telephone beeper interviews. Somehow, I got your dad's home phone number. And at about 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, I called him, and he answered. And I started to ask the question, and he said, "Eisgrau, you are relentless. I am in the middle of shaving." But I asked the question, and he answered it. And I always admired your dad for being cool under shaving.
And he was better at shaving.
You can see there's a whole subculture history of shaving in this movie, from the number of nicks on people's faces. It was a tougher thing to do in the old days. So you did interrupt him at a moment of critical.
Smoking.
I would also add that I was a
I'm glad that
political.
you're congratulating yourselves. The big elephant in the room that you did not mention, really good anecdote. Trump was able to build his first building by stripping the Commodore Hotel and putting glass up with a $400 million 20-year tax deferment given to him by Beam during this crisis.
Right.
It's all about real estate.
That
Bill
wasn't- that
Bill
wasn't
Steve
Trump.
is a real estate guy.
That
You
was
never mentioned
Trump's
him.
father.
Different Milstein.
That was Trump's father, not Trump.
It was Trump. No, Trump gave money to Beam so that his son could strip the Commodore.
Can I
Hotel.
just answer, just respond? I totally appreciate what you're bringing forward.
Yeah.
We debated it, we fought about it.
We cut a scene of that.
We
and then
can't
we
even,
cut that.
no, we cut a scene
Burying
around
the
it.
lead, hello?
Well, that's your lead,
The
but our
world is
story.
solipsistic. The whole world is not this moment. This is a history.
You can make your own movie.
Real estate
We've got
Real
questions up here.
real estate is, you have an incomplete film.
Yeah, other people find that we incomplete film for other reasons.
It's the top of the
myself.
iceberg.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. All right.
Not to trivialize everybody else's role, but could you make the argument that it was the New York Daily News headline writer who changed this entire
Totally.
story? So he kind of saved New York City as much as anybody else.
Totally.
And they lost the election, acknowledged how significant that headline was. In his mind, how unfair, but he really,
Did the election.
yeah, he thought it cost him the elections. Nixon had massively outperformed, had won New York State the previous cycle and had done much, much better in New York City.
This is a story about press, this whole story. Our film is, we use a lot of press to tell the story because that's the best way than a narrator to be able to keep track of where things are. But what the press achieved in New York for this piece of history is sort of, I don't know that we'll ever see the same happen again. Hometown press, the greatest press in the world here, delivering the story daily to New Yorkers informed, completely understanding and connecting to the stories, to who the labor leaders were, to who the bankers were, to what the issues were. It was an extraordinary time for the New York press, for sure.
It should be noted that like the film mentioned, when Rockefeller became vice president to Ford, Rockefeller was the facilitator of this crisis. He gave everything the city wanted, he okayed. And so he was central to the crisis, and it would have been a real issue if Reagan chose to say something about it.
There was a figure that kind of flew past me in the film, but I saw it again the same time I seen it. The city's budget spending increased, tripled in the course of just a decade.
Yeah.
Incredible. We had a question mark.
Peter, I noticed Michael Rohatyn.
No, that's me.
Oh, that's
Bruce Willis. I used to look like Woody Allen.
I'm actually, this is Jessica Siegel, I'm actually the events chair of the Deadline Club. I just shout out to Steve for pulling this all together. It's been incredible. Okay, seriously. Okay, so I'm a journalism professor at NYU, and here's my question. My students right now are very actively want to cover the Mandela campaign, and they're not so excited about covering Cuomo, no one mentions Siwa. And I keep hammering to them, you have to look at the numbers. How is this rent freeze and affordability going to happen? For Julia or anyone else on the panel, do you have suggestions or recommendations for young reporters about how they can bring balanced coverage today to the kind of reporting that you just said New York journalists did in the 70s that really changed how the crisis unfolded? I'm not seeing that now.
I don't have the ultimate answer, but I know I'm a journalism professor as well. I was in class today with somebody in the room here, or yesterday. I like to preach, are you going to be an activist or a journalist? And I know journalist is a big tent, and there's many great kinds of journalism. But I also like to think that when you feel that gut instinct about something that repulses you, confuses you, go toward it. You know, if you're only running toward what is your comfort zone, who you believe in, what you believe in, that to me is not the journalism I'm looking toward, or that I think the world needs. We need fact seekers and truth seekers and spectrums of opinion.
The thing is, something has changed in the air today in the coverage of the mayoral campaign compared to the kind of scrappiness we just saw in this documentary.
Well, I would say we saw that very definitively in the before the first Trump administration? How much did the press not cover the rise of Donald Trump or take him seriously? And I could say I was in a newsroom that did not seriously enough take Donald Trump's first candidacy. So it was a lesson. When you feel very strongly that you don't want to cover something, maybe you should. It's a fuller story, it's a better story. It's just what I believe and what I try to impart to my students.
I'm intrigued by what you said about journalists or your students. You're challenging them. Do you want to be an activist or do you want to be a journalist? Are you finding a lot of them come in maybe leaning more towards the activist side? They think of journalists as crusaders, and there's that fine line between crusading and being an activist.
And there's a middle ground too. The tent is large. I think what we talk most about is like what makes this journalism. We talked yesterday about what's a trusted source or not. And I'm not there to tell you this is absolutely trusted and this is not. But what are your guideposts? Like what are your standards to know when somebody's seeking the truth or fact or just pushing an agenda? I also know that a lot of my students aren't going to go into journalism, but they'll hopefully use the tools of journalism, truth-seeking, fact-finding, putting the mic in front of other people the way we saw in this film in so many great ways. That tool can be used for good in so many professions, not just journalism.
It's true. We have one more question over here, and we're going to start to wrap it up.
I love the soundtrack. How did that come about? And you should put a playlist on Spotify.
Which is one of those things you can do for free. So I think we will do that. We had to pay for the film, the music that's used in the film, unfortunately. But I'll give you a quick anecdote on that. The soundtrack, it happens to be the best year for music in the history of pop music, as far as I'm concerned. Whatever. It's an exaggeration, but you couldn't really go wrong. And so, wanting to situate, really ground the whole feeling of the movie in this period was a delight, and kind of kept us lively and kept the movie vibrant, which we, really wanted it to feel. The music is insanely expensive now, as with everything, including journalism. It has been bought by private equity, and it is like crazy how much money now you have to pay to rent 4 minutes, 30 seconds of anything. We all know this. So it's called the temp score. You're using the music you like. It's a mistake because you're going to have to get rid of it and get something else later, but we couldn't do that. We played it for a bunch of people, and it came to the attention of Bob Dylan's manager. And Bob Dylan's manager loved the movie. His name is Jeff Rosen. He's a very wonderful person, a good New Yorker. He said, "How can I help?" And I said, "Well, do you know anyone in music publishing that could help us with our deals?" He said, "Well, do you have any Dylan?" And I said, "No. Why would we have Dylan? That's a bridge too far. We wouldn't even have thought. It was like the Beatles." But he said, find any Dylan song you want, and I'll give it to you for X, which was a third of what everyone else had been quoting us. And so we, at the last, after we'd already played in the one festival that would have us before we went to our 14 weeks in downtown New York, which we had in the spring, we cut in 1 minute of a Dylan song, which is in there. And we found a 1975 recording from a live record, Hard Rain, of I Threw It All Away, which kind of brought us to the garbage strike in New York City, and it kind of worked with the themes and whatever. So that's my anecdote about the expensive soundtrack.
But it allowed us to, everyone match his so that's how we were able to
lower our
We can go on. I want to ask these guys one more question, then Mike can wrap it up. People are going to ask, "Oh, wow, I saw this great movie. Where? Well, where'd you see it? Well, I saw it before. Where's it going to be streaming?"
Right.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you?
I do. Unless something goes terribly wrong, in which case it'll be a little later, but the idea is November 14th on Amazon and Apple. You'll be able to get it as video on demand. We don't have a distributor, so this is wonderful for us. This is exactly who we would like to have see the film. These 4 people. You don't know the Bella Balsam television commercial, and now tell 2 friends. Maybe someday. That's
Mike's got his hand up. We're going to be wrapping up in just a minute. Mike?
You got time for one more vignette?
No.
Yeah, shoot. has to do with Al Shanker.
Love it.
You know, Al led not one but two strikes, 75, way back in 1967, when I came to WLEW News. I had come from anchoring television, as I mentioned, in Elkhart and South Bend, Indiana. That's Notre Dame country. And I talked to Al Shanker at that time, and I interviewed him. And I said, where did you get this idea for the strike? And he said, I got it from a teacher in South Bend, Indiana. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, there was a man named Thomas Bull, who was a special ed teacher. He led one of the first union strikes in the country. And I talked with him, said Al, and he gave me so much information and guidance that I was able to apply it to the two giant teacher strikes that hit New York. And I couldn't believe it because I had covered Tom Bull in South Bend, Indiana.
Born in the
That's
Midwest.
it.
I think, I'm afraid we're going to be hanging around here. Okay, one quick question, the last question.
Is it Albert Shanker related? When you were putting together describing Albert Shanker to an audience that maybe did not know him, and how powerful and his imprint on teachers in the country, did you ever consider the clip from the Woody Allen movie, where they quote, you know, that Albert Shanker got a nuclear warhead and blew up the world?
We did, yeah, and we cut it into the film. We cut everything into the film, and then we took most things out. But yeah,
Which Allen's phone was that in?
It's in Sleeper.
Sleeper.
It's in Sleeper, and Woody Allen wakes up in the future after an apocalyptic war, and he asks what happened, and the doctors say, a man named Albert Shanker got hold of the nuclear bomb. We tried to use it.
That's a great note. I wish I had this. I want to thank our panelists.